Imagine you are trekking through a rugged, hilly landscape on a warm, prehistoric afternoon. Right beside a worn game trail where wild animals frequently pass, a tiny underground spring quietly bubbles up through the soil. You step closer, scoop a handful of water to your lips, and immediately notice a completely unfamiliar taste. It is sharply salty, slightly bitter, and unlike any freshwater stream in the region. This is not water you can drink to quench your thirst. But when those droplets splash onto the surrounding boulders and evaporate under the scorching sun, something magical happens. The water disappears, leaving behind a delicate, snow-white crust made of countless microscopic crystals. You scrape a pinch of that white powder with your finger, touch it to your tongue, and then sprinkle it over a freshly roasted piece of hunted game. Instantly, the flavor of the meat explodes, richer, deeper, and more satisfying than ever before. Perhaps the extraordinary story of salt began with a trace as small and accidental as that. The moment a human being realized they could make water vanish, yet capture its very soul in the form of solid white crystals. We often hold the mistaken belief that on some fine day during the Neolithic period, our ancestors suddenly discovered that they needed to eat salt. But biological reality and evolutionary history tell a much deeper story. There was never a single first salty meal or a first grain of salt that kicked off this biological craving. The truth is that humans have been consuming sodium for millions of years, long before we ever laid eyes on a salt rock or a crystalline grain. Sodium is an absolute biological necessity for life. It is the electrolytic conductor for every neural impulse, the driver of every muscle contraction, and the regulator of blood volume in your veins. Back when our ancestors were mobile hunter-gatherers, they absorbed a sufficient amount of sodium directly from their natural food sources, from muscle meat, organs, bone marrow, animal blood, ocean fish, and mineral-rich wild roots and plants. Our physiological systems evolved in a world where sodium was relatively scarce. Because of this, our kidneys and endocrine systems were engineered as grand champions at hoarding and conserving every precious milligram of sodium, rather than constantly flushing out the massive industrial quantities we ingest from processed foods today. You can easily survive and maintain vigorous health without ever touching a salt shaker on a dining table. Therefore, we have to separate two distinct concepts. Consuming sodium is an ancient biological need, but producing crystalline salt is a cultural technology that emerged much later in our story. So when did that technological turning point actually happen? And why does archaeology face such a monumental challenge when trying to pinpoint the exact moment humans first seasoned their food? The answer lies in the challenging physical nature of salt itself. Salt dissolves effortlessly in water. It leaves behind no bones. It doesn't fossilize like a flint spearhead. It cannot survive heavy rains, and if it was eaten by a prehistoric person, it vanished completely without a trace. Archaeologists almost never uncover the actual ancient salt grains that were consumed. What time does allow us to find is not the product, but the infrastructure used to manufacture it. Thick layers of accumulated ash, earth baked bright red by intense heat, brine storage pits, and above all, thousands of shattered specialized clay vessels known as briquettage. The salt melted away into the earth, but the prehistoric factories that manufactured it stood firm against the test of time. One of the earliest and clearest pieces of direct evidence for organized salt production comes from the archaeological site of Poiana Slatinei in modern-day northeastern Romania, right next to a natural saltwater spring with a mineral concentration several times higher than the ocean. Archaeologists uncovered a massive ash mound standing nearly 10 feet tall. Dating analysis reveals that around 6,000 years before the Common Era, Neolithic communities here were no longer just passively foraging for salt. They were filling ceramic vessels with salty spring water, placing them over roaring hearths, and continuously boiling away tons of water to crystallize solid salt. They repeated this industrial process hundreds, even thousands of times. This was a profound technological leap. Fire did not create the salt, but fire created the ability to separate salt from heavy, bulky, and difficult-to-carry volumes of water. Think about the immense economic value of this technological transformation. Salty spring water is heavy, prone to spilling, and geographically chained to a single location. But once you concentrate it into dry crystals, or mold it into solid salt cakes, it becomes vastly lighter. Dry salt doesn't spoil. It can be divided into standardized portions, packed into woven baskets, and carried on the backs of traveling merchants across mountain ranges to remote villages that had never seen the ocean or a mineral spring. Humans didn't just discover salt. We invented a way to detach it from the natural landscape and carry it across the world. Yet, what caused salt production to suddenly explode in scale during the Neolithic period, right after humans began settling down and farming? When our ancestors abandoned their mobile hunting lifestyles to build permanent agricultural villages, their daily diets underwent a radical shift. Their meals began revolving around cereal gruels, wheat, barley, lentils, and domesticated vegetables, foods with a significantly lower natural sodium content than wild animal meat. At the same time, domesticated herds of cattle, sheep, and goats penned around the village were desperately craving minerals. A pinch of salt stirred into a pot of gruel didn't just make a bland meal taste delicious. It became a vital physiological supplement for both the humans and the herds that kept the community alive. But the ultimate value of salt in the ancient agricultural world went far beyond the taste on the tip of the tongue. Salt was a miraculous time machine that allowed humans to conquer decay. When you hunt a large animal or harvest tons of fish during a seasonal run, that meat will be rapidly consumed by bacterial decomposition in just a few days. But if you pack that meat in a high concentration of salt, the crystals continuously draw water out of the tissues, stripping bacteria of the moisture they need to survive and stopping decay in its tracks. When combined with drying or smoking, a perishable cut of meat transforms into a reliable food reserve that can last for months through freezing winters or scorching droughts. Salt didn't just change the flavor of food. It permanently changed the span of time between the moment food was harvested and the moment humans were forced to consume it. A successful hunt was no longer just an immediate fleeting feast. It became stored wealth for an entire lineage. Because of its ability to be concentrated, preserved, and easily transported, salt quietly rose to become one of humanity's earliest systems of currency and exchange, long before metal coins were ever minted. The distribution of saltwater springs and rock salt deposits across our planet is wildly uneven. Some regions are completely devoid of salty minerals, while others are blessed with an abundance. The village, situated near a brine spring, suddenly held absolute geographical power. They could boil the brine, cast standardized salt cakes, and trade them for the highest quality flint from mountain tribes, exquisite pottery, abundant food, warm furs, or even copper and iron in later eras. Salt turned a random geological boundary into an economic power dynamic. Whoever controlled the saltwater source controlled a critical resource that distant communities couldn't manufacture locally, no matter how hard they worked. This evolution from a simple nutritional need into a powerful industry is displayed in all its glory at the archaeological site of Provadia-Solnitsata in modern-day Bulgaria. By the late 5th millennium BCE, this was no longer a modest part-time salt-boiling camp. It had grown into a massive, specialized production center. The people here built enormous clay furnaces with deep ceramic basins, churning out a volume of salt that vastly exceeded the needs of the local population. To protect that immensely valuable wealth, they had to erect towering, fortified stone walls around their settlement. As production skyrocketed, salt escaped its role as a simple seasoning in a cooking pot. It transformed into complex divisions of labor, territorial borders, and the very foundation of social stratification in early Bronze Age Europe. As technology marched forward, humans realized they didn't always have to patiently boil water to get their salt. In regions with unique geological formations, salt sat exposed on the surface or buried deep underground like solid rock mountains. At Duzdag in Azerbaijan, archaeological evidence shows that more than 4,000 years before the Common Era, our ancestors walked into the heart of salt mountains wielding heavy stone hammers, chipping away and directly mining massive blocks of rock salt. If boiling brine required humans to patiently remove tons of water to get to the salt, mining required them to use raw muscle power to rip the salt directly from the living body of the mountain. These two parallel technological paths, steam rising from ceramic pots and stone hammers echoing in underground mine shafts, worked together to draw a vast, intricate web of trade routes connecting ancient civilizations from Europe and the Middle East all the way to the Yangtze River Valley in China. However, when we look at these prehistoric industrial salt factories, it is very easy to fall into a modern cognitive trap. We tell ourselves, because our ancestors built such massive salt factories, they must have eaten highly salted, flavor-packed food just like we do today. That is a flawed assumption. The massive output of an ancient salt factory reflects its economic importance and commercial scale, not the dietary intake of an individual person. A huge percentage of that salt was dedicated to curing fish, preserving meat for the winter, providing regular mineral supplements to thousands of livestock, serving in spiritual rituals, processing leather, and being divided up as trade goods for countless neighboring villages. The existence of ancient salt factories does not turn our 21st century diet of ultra-processed, salt-drenched food into the original, biologically standardized diet of the human species. Today, when we walk into a modern supermarket, salt sits there neatly in tiny shakers, so cheap it has become practically invisible. We sprinkle it out of habit, absorb it unconsciously through processed snacks, and almost entirely forget its grueling journey through time. But remember, to get that savory crunch on the tip of your tongue today, our ancestors had to complete a breathtaking evolutionary journey. We started as creatures relying on the meager natural sodium hidden inside muscle meat and wild plants. We learned how to recognize strange saltwater springs, how to use fire to burn away water, how to fire ceramics to concentrate crystals, and how to turn a quiet physiological need of the body into powerful trade networks that shaped humanity's very first villages and currencies. That salt shaker sitting on your dining table is not just a common kitchen condiment. It is the crystallization of one of the greatest survival and food preservation technologies humanity ever invented. If you love peeling back the foggy layers of time to see the strange origins and flawless evolutionary logic that forged our species' habits, keep exploring with Cave Curious, because sometimes the things that seem like the smallest, cheapest, and most ordinary materials in your daily life are precisely the forces that once held enough power to redirect the entire course of human history. We'll see you around the campfire for our next journey into the strange, uncharted corners of the human story.